Hey guys, I'm Steve Huston. I'm going to show you a little bit about how I draw and specifically how I think about gesture and structure and how they connect. I think of we artists as mainly connectors, not so much craftsmen. The craft is a way to bring things together to compose. So we're going to compose gesture and structure together, and I consider those the foundations of any great art. So here we've got a head. I'm going to draw the long axis of the face without the features, without the bumpy architecture. Really well drawn or crudely drawn. There it's about the landscape. And again, look at all the corners there. They might be rounded corners, but still corners. I'm going to cut off the features. Notice every line I'm drawing, the long axis of that line is curved. But I'm really looking for the long axis curve that's going to connect the next curve. That head's giving me a lot of trouble, or it's really beautiful, or I want to make sure my audience understands it's a particular position, particular character that I'm drawing. I might do quite a bit of work on that particular structure, two-dimensionally or three-dimensionally, until I feel ready to pick out the next gesture, long axis curve. Now I'm going to go from the chin to the pit of the neck. I might use several connective devices, maybe some anatomy, maybe some shadow shapes, maybe measure it. Whatever I want to do to make it comfortable for me, so I'm confident that when I add the next thing, it's in the right place in the right character. Here's the shoulder line. I might well draw some of the nuances of that, trapezius and stuff, whatever, collarbone, whatever you feel you need or you feel your audience needs. And then when I get to the next part, gesture, build all this two-dimensional structure, all these connecting lines, whatever scaffolding I feel comfortable, whatever process I want to use to build that. Now I'm going to add the next gesture. Maybe center line, breastbone, belly button down to the crotch. In this case, so we lose the crotch of that leg. Or maybe out to the arm. Now, notice if we look at the contour, there's the trapezius, there's the deltoid, the shoulder, collarbone to the pit of the neck. Notice this is a bunch of wobbles, but I may not know the anatomy, but I know architecturally that there's a shoulder and then there's an arm. So I'm just going to continue the shoulder line or the shoulder line across, and I'm going to create a corner for that arm. I'll draw these long axis curves and overshoot them and just crisscross them. That's going to be my corner. That's going to be where the shoulder girdle ends, where the neck and the shrugging muscles end, whatever it is, and the arm begins. Corner. Corner is structure. Corner is also where the body parts separate. They may align or they may separate. I can still think of that as a little corner to separate them, to place them, and act as a landmark to build them. Long axis curve, drawing through. So let's try it again real quick. Let's make it much simpler. Long axis of the face, draw some, in this case, very simple part, maybe just a bit. Get enough structure to find the next gesture. Now I'm going to build structure on that. Build enough structure to find the next gesture. Notice the shoulder line, the long axis curve is going that way. Enough structure for you. I might make a different series of choices to find the next gesture. So notice what I'm doing. I'm drawing the gesture line, which is the long axis, and then I'm building the shape around it. In this case, I'm going down the center of the torso, building a shape around it. Now, think about what's going on here for just a second. Whatever I'm drawing, the best I'm going to have is half of that. I only see half of that. If I see the back of the hand, I can't see the front of the hand. So the best we'll ever find is half of the form, and yet to show structure, we've got to give the audience a feeling that there is a back even though we see the front. So the more connection we can make with things, the better. So here's what I'll do. I'll say it now simply. That was my feeling of the rib cage. Let's just do this. Based on the connection of the throat to the pit of the neck to the breastbone. Okay, so I got my connective strategy. But look what happens if I imagine seeing what I can't see. I'm going to come off this neck, and I'm going to think of the neck not into the shoulder line that goes into the arm, but the neck going through the interruption. And I like to draw several lines so it slows me down. As I draw this, I can start to think over here, oh, okay, now this in relationship to this other side, there's the breastbone. It's one of the reasons I like to draw lighter. I try and draw a little darker when I'm on camera, but if I draw lighter, these things will fade away in the rendering. I'll replace it with a darker, more confident line. Now, by looking for the connective strategy, that's that gesture, the long axis curve, past the interruption. So I think of that shoulder girdle like football players' shoulder pads. They go on top of the body, but they're not completely part of the body. The body's underneath, the neck goes through to the rib cage.
This lesson is from my Drawing Basics course at proko.com/drawing, but Steve Huston also just released his own series of figure drawing lectures at proko.com/Huston. Hurry, because it's 20% off right now during the pre-sale.
So as I add new things, I try and find more than one way, ideally 2 or 3 ways. I'm going to connect the neck to the breastbone of the rib cage. I'm going to connect the neck to the shoulder line that sits on the rib cage, and I'm going to connect the neck to the back kind of spine area, to the back side of the rib cage. 3 ways to double check, or triple check in this case, where each thing sits correctly. If I do that many times, I'll start building a vision of what's true for me, what's right for a dynamic figure in these kind of poses. So part of the craft level is learning to actually see and having a process where you can support the sight and not guess so much, but try several ways to reinforce and double check that right is indeed right. So we pick that up and then we just move along. And if I have trouble finding that particular connection, I'll add more of the secondary, the smaller parts. So maybe I'm not sure if that rib cage is in the right spot. I might need to add some of the shoulder girdle, maybe just the nipples. I'll add enough information to find what rings true. Enough information so I feel confident of these things. Maybe pick a little bit of the ribs and so on. And then I go to the next corner and I begin again. There's the shoulder, but I'm going to pick up this shrug of the shoulder and the collarbone and the armpit. Again, triple checking whenever I can, and we can't always, triple checking what right is. In this case, notice that the upper arm goes in generally the same direction as the forearm. So we could group that whole upper arm and forearm all the way down to the wrist as one longer curve. If I'm not confident of where to build that hand or whether that overall arm is right, because I took up a big chunk of real estate, so that means there's more room for error there. So then I'll come back again as I did here and break it into smaller pieces. So I might find a bump of the bicep, and when I look at that bicep, how far away? Maybe that will give me a better understanding. Now a third time I've corrected, I'll darken it for you, corrected that rib cage position until I'm more and more confident of what true is. I might come back here and overshoot this as I overshot that to give a little corner of where the elbow is. And then I might render that corner away in the finish, pulling that through. If I'm not going to finish an area, if this is a quick sketch, the model's changing so I don't have time to put on the hand, I'll do the gesture, and I'm going to exaggerate this. I'm going to turn it back like the hand is turned that way just for effect. I'll draw the gesture without the structure because the gesture is more important than the structure. It's the connective strategy between forearm, wrist, and hand in this case. It's the energy of life in this mannequin that can feel wooden and plastic and dead. So if I have to do one thing, I'll do the gesture. To me, it's more fundamental and more important than whether we draw a 2-dimensional arm or a 2x4 for an upper arm or a tube or some complicated series of structures. The gesture first. So my priority is to bring the energy and life, the ever-evolving relationship of things first. And then if I don't get any farther, I've got what I consider the most important idea and the most difficult idea oftentimes, because it's not getting the parts. That's not all that difficult. I can draw some simple shape for every body part with some practice, very crudely or more sophisticated way. The real mastery of any art form is a connective strategy. I can hit every note on the piano, but I'm not a great pianist at all because I can't string those notes and chords together to create a melody. The mastery of every art form is the connective strategy, showing how the separate comes together, the separate colors in a composition, the separate shapes and structures in a pose. That's all gestural. The connective strategy is a gestural. So if I have to give up something, I'll actually give up structure to get the gesture. And then if I have time, I'll build ever more refined structures to double check the position of the gesture. And you might need to put in more than one corner. So say model's changing, I don't have time to figure out that foot. I'm just going to do the curve and then the S curve off the foot or off the knee and shin into the foot. That's going to ring true even at that simple level. And if it's not right proportionally, I'll adjust that. So now I'm going to draw through and get the next connection of that back side of the buttocks, the hips, and then I'll pick up the gesture here. And notice that this gesture of the thigh is disconnected. It's hidden by that front leg. So if I can, I'll try and connect it to something up here. Anything I can. But let's say I've got this just dead ending as it does, and I can come off this back side and get the back side of the hips into the beautiful thigh. Notice this is a tube. Could have been a 2x4. Make a little 2x4 just for variety's sake. But that might not be clear enough. I'm not sure. Is that too long? Is it too short? So I might well build a secondary structure into it. So maybe I'll build the egg of the bulging muscles of the quadriceps and the hamstrings and build that secondary structure into that primary structure to help describe a more sophisticated down current gesture. I'll do whatever I need to get it right, and then I'll realize, oh, okay, a little too long, should be there. And it takes off again. Gesture. If I don't have time, that's it. If I have enough time, structure. The structure might be sophisticated, might be incredibly simple, might be not there at all. But back on this side, I would love to have this connect in several ways. Well, of course, it does connect in terms of overlapping forms, just like snowman head and rib cage connect by abutting together. But if we can flow back through, so I'm going to come back again and see I've got a series of bumps. There's kind of my snowman thinking. That's good. And it might be enough. But ideally, if I could come off the back side of the torso here, of the rib cage and the waist, and pull that right down, and I might even move it so it lines right up with that initial flow past these interruptions. So we got the rib cage, the hips in the way, flowing right into the back of the hamstrings without the bulging mass of the hamstrings. Or even, as we'll find in a bit, maybe in the shadow shape. Maybe it lines up in the shadow shape. Now look at the internal connective, and I'm going to cheat on this shadow here just so you can see that visually a little better. Notice this ends at the hips, this ends at the hips, but these align, and even if they missed a little bit, the audience will feel, they won't be able to recognize it consciously, but they'll feel the connective strategy there. And when I do that, then I start getting a better sense of it. This is really, should be up here. And I want that shorter yet. And I could, with practice, whether it's contoured or constructed style, build it all into one. So I'm drawing the, let's say, the beautiful finished contour down there, the beautiful connective overlaps, the shading, and thinking about gesture structure all together and combining those several steps into one more holistic idea. And this is the kind of thing I keep doing again and again. Notice this still feels disconnected. When you practice these things, allow yourself to not be great, to have to work on that. So I worked on that 3 times. It still doesn't feel right. Let's pull it over here. I was trying to get the connective strategies right, finding several ways to tie into. And I was going to say on this side, I might well bring in the rib cage or the tone, but I'm trying to find several ways to connect through the interruptions. The job I gave myself in this particular drawing was to get the long axis curves connecting several structures together. I'm going to forgive maybe bad line quality, maybe bad rendering if it got that far, or bad proportions. So the proportions got a little out of whack on there. That's okay. I wasn't focused on that. So don't judge yourself by several things when you're trying to work through and get better at one thing. So now I'll simply, if it bugs me and it's the right time, I'll do it again and I'll work on those proportions now. So now I'm stacking the long axis curves, the long axis connective strategies with the other idea of proportion, and I want them both to work together. And right now I'm just working with this. So one of the mistakes I see beginners and pros make is they're too hard on themselves. They want everything to be right every time. This is sketching. This is the learning process. This is my sketchbook. Or this is exactly what I do for a finished painting. I'll draw this just like this in the finished painting and start painting and realize, whoops, as I'm painting that rib cage, I realize that leg's disconnected. I'll redraw it just as I'm doing here, right in the painting. There's going to be a finish that goes to a gallery. And oftentimes for me, I'll put in the shadow shapes. And I'll show you how to do that in a second, because it breaks the real estate up into smaller pieces and it looks a little more real. This is a kind of an abstraction of the figure. It's a stylization. It's a replacement through a process of what the figure's not this at all, but this is a distillation of it. And so I might end up building quite a bit of the finish in this, or keep it super simple, whatever I need to understand what true is for this drawing. What's the true proportions? What's the true connection? Now that feels better. Now I'm going to try it again maybe. Now it's the rib cage coming off that beautiful swing of the back, building into this hip. And now I'm going to do it again. And it might be a shortcut that only I understand, or it might be really carefully worked out. I might add detail of the shadows to break this stuff up, to get it a little closer to the reality of the reference and not so abstracted as a process that is not truly what we see. Any or all those things. But I'm only measuring my success one problem at a time. I want to figure out the proportions between this rib cage and this backside disconnected, interrupted leg. And I'll keep doing it again and again. Chunking down, it's called. Chunking down. Don't try and solve every problem when you're learning, and we're always learning. Even as you're learning in a finish, chunk down and work on just that. Get that problem proportion better. Now the shape of the shadow, that'll be the next thing I chunk down. Now the value of the shape of the shadow. Now the edge control on the shape of the shadow. You do that, you chunk down, you're going to find that you level up. Should be a t-shirt maybe. Level up much quicker with less frustration, because you're not holding yourself to an impossible standard. A long axis curve, which is a connective strategy in the energy, and simple constructed shapes, corners and curves and corners as I laid it in. And that curved and corner, that connective strategy that we've just played with and worked through, carries through whether we're doing a simple construction line or a beautifully finished rendering in charcoal or oil paint, or a sculpture in clay. We can use the same thinking throughout the process, so we don't have to abandon our thinking of construction when we move into rendering, and we don't have to change our thinking around rendering when we change the materials of rendering. There'll be a little process difference between oil paint and charcoal, but my thinking will be the same. If I can keep a consistent thought process about what's most important, first the structure and the gesture, now the proportions, now the shadow shapes on the structure and the gesture, and so on. We do that, we can progress through any medium, any concept, any level of beginning construction and finish rendering we want to do.
We have more guest demos from Steve Huston in my Drawing Basics course at proko.com/drawing. Or, if you want to go straight to the source, Steve has a new series of figure drawing lectures at proko.com/Huston. It's a clear and intuitive way to approach the figure, packed with practical insight from one of my personal favorite artists and teachers.